Good afternoon again. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We're getting back to the JRC here in a moment, but before we do, the disclaimers. If you're unfamiliar with the Stop the Shocks campaign or the campaign against the troubled teen industry, pertinent links are there in the description box. We have Autistic Hoya's massive archive on the subject. Got the article written by Neuroclastic that actually managed to trigger the JRC so much they threatened them with a defamation lawsuit. They don't want you to know the opinions of other professional ABA folks that disagree with their psycho. So, they threatened them with a defamation lawsuit. Neuroclastic said no. Please read the article and share it. And if you got a moment, we got their GoFundMe linked in there as well, because unlike the JRC, we advocates do not have access to unlimited funding. To our trigger warnings. Bless, sorry folks. It's been a long day. When we talk about places like the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center or Agape Boarding School for Boys, you're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips or surveillance footage of people with mental health issues and disabled people being tortured and abused. If you got youngins present, please use your headphones. This channel is marked not for kids for a reason. We do use profanity and speak on dark subjects. If your child is 16 and younger and watching this, parental supervision is advised. We are now moving on to the next second sentence. And I realize now why SAS sounded familiar. This is one of the folks that they have used multiple times in different comments, depending on what's going on, who try to convince us to let them continue torturing us. So, that's why it's familiar, but I must still dissect it. I repeat the same things over and over and over again. And poor FDA. I really do. If the drink isn't their poison, somebody get them a vape. Maybe some fruit. I don't know. Something nice. They deserve it. The poor bastards. Just saying. All right. These traumatic and serious SIBs include SAS slapping and hitting her face and head, slamming her body into walls and furniture, pulling out her hair, and inducing vomiting. Do you all have any inclination as to why she was engaging in those behaviors, JRC? Inquiring minds would like to know. Do you know why they're exhibiting the behaviors? And please, for the love of God, being an autistic myself, do not tell me it's the tism. The tism may affect how certain traits or behaviors are displayed. They do not provide the reasoning as to why the behaviors are occurring. Let me say that again. Being autistic may control what the behaviors coming out of me may look like on the outside. They do not cause the triggers that set off the behaviors in the first place. Okay? If you don't know, are you trying to look to find out? Or are you assuming, as so many in ABA do, that you already know the cause and are therefore using useless remedies that are not dealing with the triggers? Because I'm pretty sure it's the latter. Let me explain to you all the same things I've said over and over again on this channel as to why that is. Let's get started, shall we? Remember when I said to you all in meltdowns that I would literally make a fist and punch myself in the face, specifically the jaw and forehead? that I would repeatedly slam my head into the walls and into the floor of my bedroom, that I would sometimes slam my entire body into the old 90s, late 80s walnut, full walnut dressers, slam it into that, slam it into the wall, slam it into the floor repeatedly. Yep, walls and furniture. Probably the only thing I didn't do was pulling out my hair. I don't know why I never really engaged in that, but it's kind of the one thing I didn't do. Tiff, you induced vomiting? There's a reason behind that I didn't even realize that young. I've had stomach issues from as far back as I can remember, like major acid issues. My mom could tell you how many times I called home feeling the need to go home because my stomach hurt very, very badly. Right? So one time by accident, I wasn't even trying to trigger anything necessarily. I threw up and the acid came out, burned my throat all to hell, but immediately afterwards, my stomach calmed down and stopped hurting. So, little kid logic, instead of, going and telling my mom what was going on, I'm like, well, obviously I've got this. When I have the stomach problem, I'll just go do that. Problem solved. Thankfully, my mom is hell of observant. And you know that knowing gaze, where first she tried to discern whether I was bulimic or not. I wasn't. I was operating off of kid logic. So once she had that figured out, and that worry didn't turn into anything, she got me to the doctor and I started taking antacids, and then I was okay afterwards going through high school and everything. Why am I telling you this? It goes back to the point of what's triggering the behaviors. And are we trying to find that out? Or are we just assuming we know? And in the assuming we know, are we going with the standard ABA? They're just trying to get attention or trying to manipulate others into getting things we want, which is another way of saying the neurotypicals are projecting why they would do those things onto people who are not neurotypicals and do not operate whatsoever under the same motivations for the things that we do that they do. Or is it more of the general, well, they're having the behaviors because they're autistic and you don't read any further into it? Because those are generally the two camps within that realm here, if they're not actually digging into the triggering. Again, we still have a few holdovers from the dinosaur era, and unfortunately, one of them is now running HHS, who was one of the most notorious crackpot anti-vaxxers to ever disgrace God's green earth. Do not get me started on that man, Jenny McCarthy, or Andrew Wakefield, or we're going to be here for the next 20 to 35 years. I've got all the material. My point is, you can list behaviors to try to garner shock value. But if you're dealing with someone who's more than just the general public who is fighting against you, and you're just listing behaviors, but you're not showing if anything was done in any way to try and figure out what the triggers were behind said triggers, then I'm afraid we're at an impasse. The logical thing would be finding what's causing this to happen. Because as we know from history, violence only works for so long and will only behave just long enough to get people to leave us alone. One way or another, eventually the behaviors are going to come back, whether out of complete exhaustion or whether we've been left alone long enough to be feeling a false sense of security. Okay? That's just a fact. If you don't deal with the triggers, then the behaviors haven't truly gone away. They're just being masked and suppressed. As someone who had to suppress a whole lot over years, the psychological damage and toll it is to suppress and hide all that emotion for that long is damn near catastrophic. Even then, some of us who have some of the strongest wills and are some of the most stubborn bitches and bastards this side of God's green earth. Even someone as bullheaded as me. If you don't deal with the triggers, the behaviors are going to come back. It's only a matter of time. The answer shouldn't be to continue to inflict violence and knowingly causing us physical pain to stop the behaviors when there is a far more humane and logical way to deal with these issues. And for the love of God, if I hear again that we tried everything, when I know you haven't, because a full functional behavioral assessment was not carried out before they even started looking in regards to what services were available, then whatever your opinion is not worth the poor tree that had to die for you to write it on. Point blank. I'm old, I'm cranky, and I just don't have the luxury anymore of caring about other people's feelings. All right? It's pretty simple. You can list all these behaviors, but without context, it gives us nothing. And it does not convince anyone of the rightness of your treatment, JRC. Number two, like in the previous thing, when you give vague terminology such as severe behavior disorder, without naming what that disorder is, that usually produces a red flag that tells me you're trying to hide something. It generally does with anybody that has worked in any capacity whatsoever in this field. Okay? It's particularly noted that when you just list the behaviors, and we can see concretely with our own eyes that there are no details that at any point in time any of your staff tried to get to what is triggering the behaviors. I'm sorry, but that completely disqualifies your arguments and supposing you tried everything completely. If you didn't try to figure out what those triggers were before you put them on a human shock collar, you did not try everything. Simple as. Simple as. Alright? Now, we're going to do another video here in a moment, but let's talk about those triggers, because I told you guys a lot of my meltdowns was due to the horrific abuse from my stepbrother that I was dealing with at the time. That was triggering a lot of it. And even now, when the PTSD kicks in and I have a flashback, guess what behaviors tend to come back? They don't last as long. Thankfully, they're not as virulent. Thank you, medication. And it's only about around a brief fog brain where if I can calm myself down and yes, watch something as dumb and kiddish as Looney Tunes for a good 2 hours or so before going to bed, I'm pretty good the next day. Didn't used to be that way, but see, this is the difference between those who understand what they're dealing with and those who do not. You know? If you don't know what's triggering the behaviors, but you're inflicting violence on someone, that's not treatment. That is torture. The argument that it stops the behavior does not justify the treatment. Where if you had simply tried the logical way of digging and finding out what those triggers were, and for all the people, but my kid isn't like you, they can't talk and get online and read and write. Well, first of all, Karen, just to bust your bubble, I'm not saying there aren't cases where that is the case, but I have seen multiple cases where that is actually not the case. They can read, they can understand what you are saying, they just happen to be nonverbal. Okay? But they're not communicating. I'm pretty sure screaming and yelling, no, stop, is some pretty clear communication. And if you think it's not, perhaps it's you that needs to be in the facility and not the kid. Because I don't think it gets much clearer than somebody screaming, no, stop. Or just screaming in pain, period. Because I've heard that too, but they can't speak and tell me what's wrong. Are they screaming? Yes. Does it look like they're in pain? Yes. That's your clear communication, Karen. They want you to stop the things that is causing them physical pain. That is communication. Just because it doesn't have words does not mean it's not communication. You don't want to know how many times I have had to have that argument. You don't. But obviously, I've made my point. Listing behaviors while not showing us whether there was any work done whatsoever to determine what was triggering said behaviors before you roll us up to a judge, all dressed up like we're Hannibal Lecter, so that they can sign off on putting us in a human shock collar. It's not a good argument. You did not try everything before forcing them to wear that device if you did not do any kind of digging to figure out what's triggering the behaviors. But they've done everything else. That doesn't matter. They could have been thrown out of 100 different schools, out of 100 different countries, for all I give a damn. If nobody at any point tried to figure out with that kid what was triggering those behaviors, you have not tried everything. Simples. Gonna go ahead and close on that one, folks. We don't get very many views on this channel, and the few we do get do tend to get removed from time to time. So please don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe. Please don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time. As always, folks, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. Again, I will see you all here in a few minutes. Bye-bye, everyone.